Alright, what's up YouTube? We're back again. Guess this would be round 3. So today's goal, I'm by myself, my buddy can't make it. So today's goal is going to be to drop this subframe by myself. I've got some rearranging to do. I don't like how the car is sitting, so I'm going to move some jack stands around and stuff, and then it'll be time to start slinging some wrenches. So since the last video, I put the same, my last video I posted on Facebook as well. I put it on a Cobalt page, and by the grace of God, I had 2 guys message me saying, you know, they had the parts or whatever. One guy said he would just give them to me. It's cool how generous and kind people are in the car community when you have a common problem, and people that have been through it in this specific scenario, they know there's no other fix for it. So, you know, I would do the same thing for the next guy. In fact, I try to do that with my Tahoe parts. But anyway, I ended up finding a 5th gear set, a used set out of an LNF car, guy up in Canada. He pulled it out of the trans, and it looks brand new uncompared to this. I mean, you can tell that one's pretty far gone. So that should be in the mail shortly. So to reiterate, what we're doing here is fixing the 5th gear and replacing the clutch. Those are the 2 main problems with this vehicle. So with that being said, while I have it apart, I'm going to take care of some sway bar bushings and sway bar end lengths and little petty shit like that, you know, just wearable items. But one thing I'm considering here is to go ahead and pull the whole motor. I know I'm going to need to do a timing chain, and I'm already going to have it, you know, so far apart. So why not just take it all the way out instead of fight with a cramped space to get that timing chain in and out. I know it can be done. It's how people do them all the time, but given my scenario, probably wouldn't be too much extra work to go ahead and pull the whole thing. The only thing is obviously the refrigerant and the air conditioning lines, and then the coolant. So yeah, it'll make a mess. To do it correctly, you need to get an evacuation pump and a tank to hold your refrigerant. But that's a little further down the road. I'm only going to be able to do so much by myself, and especially being the first time I've ever been into the car to that degree, I'll be taking things very, very slow. So, unfortunately, I don't like laying underneath the car with my phone propped up on something recording. It tends to get damaged. So I will try to make sure I note anything that I had difficulty with, or another problem I find, whatever it may be. So this will be the first part of this video that I'm going to post. So yeah, here we are. It's time to tear back into it a little further, see if we can get the entire transmission out today by myself. Apparently it only weighs about 100 pounds. So, you know, I did the frame swap of the Tahoe on my other videos, and I did that by myself, and for some reason I'm scared shitless of this thing, mainly because it's a light ass car, and when I popped the passenger half shaft out, I shook the whole damn thing pretty hard, and that scared me. So anyway, we're gonna start with rearranging stands, and I'm probably gonna go ahead and put the back of the car back on the ground. It didn't really need to be up. So start with that, and I'll check in here in a bit after I get a bit rearranged and cleaned up a little bit. Don't have the most space, but it is nice to be able to work on this versus the Tahoe and the same amount of space. To touch on the Tahoe real quick, if you haven't seen the other videos, I've had the truck for 8 years. I've driven it 200,000 miles myself. Used to be a real pretty looking truck. Had it all together, and then one day it got smashed. So check out those other videos if you want to see how I went about to at least get it back to driving condition. Got a new frame for it, and, you know, redid the whole 9 yards, every part, bracket, piece of rubber, nut, bolt, whatever I could replace, I replaced. So long story short, the truck has 312,000 miles, but it drives like I just pulled it off the car lot. So yeah, it's ugly. Yeah, it's got a lot of rust, but that's that'll be coming up here soon in the next few months. Once it gets a little warmer outside, I do anticipate moving, so I got a few hoops to jump through, but all that starts with getting this piece of shit out of the way. So unfortunately, these things are loaded with pretty nasty problems that require pretty intricate repairs, and unfortunately, I'm not willing to keep going with this. So inevitably, it'll probably end up with a for sale sign in the window. I still owe too much money on it. I got all that speeding tickets in it, so my insurance is through the roof. It's just time to move on to something else. I can't let this keep financially holding me back. So anyway, here's part one. We'll be back with part two here in a bit after I get situated. Yeah, so one thing before I really get started here, guys, I want to note on, I'll throw this in there real fast, is I was real good about this with the Tahoe, and it comes from what I do for a living. I used to rebuild CNC grinding machines, very, very, very expensive, highly precise machinery, and a lot of the components can't be replaced. You have to save them. So I got really hip to bag and tagging everything. So depending on your comfort level, you don't have to do every single bolt. So for example, this side is my driver's side. It has everything to do with the strut and the linkage, and because I know where that stuff goes. But even as small as some of this other stuff, driver headlight bracket, okay, if I had a pile of these, maybe I didn't know where exactly they went. So there's another good example. Just, you know, flatten a bag out on a table, write on it with Sharpie before you throw your parts in there. There's absolutely no guesswork. Okay, where did this side go? What's this side to? See, there's my wheel well clips, but I know exactly how many I took out of the driver's side. So it's a good idea. Here's another random one. It's got a single bolt in it. It's the steering shaft to clamp the fuck was it called? I forget. The intermediate shaft to the actual racket pinion. So just to touch base on that real quick, this was a lifesaver when I redid the Tahoe, but I also had a whole entire truck on a shelf, and in fact, a lot of that hardware got replaced, but it was good to have for reference. So for example, here's some old shit. E-brake. I didn't put any of my e-brake back on. Here's another one. Shock hardware. I ended up having some new bolts that I put in. So it's just a good idea, guys, to help you stay organized, keep all your stuff together. Really take the time to do that. It'll save you hours in the end. Trust me when I say hours. So unless you're real familiar, you've had your car apart a bunch of times, then yeah, go for it. Leave it in a pile. But when you're digging into a level you haven't been before, it's a really good idea to stay organized and bag and tag every single thing. And if you're really not sure, like for example, this mess of hoses and cables and the routing of it, I took a bunch of pictures of this shit when I took it apart one at a time. So just a heads up, something that I do to help me along the process. Yeah, I've had this car apart pretty much to this point here multiple times, but I don't want to have to think about it at all when I put it back together. I just want to be able to grab a bag of bolts and boom, done. So just to touch base on that real quick, but I'll be right back with a few updates here in a moment. Alright guys, this is the final setup. This is how we're going to take the car apart. So initially I had envisioned just taking the whole thing up to the sky. Fortunately, there's no good place to grab the cobalt in the center and the back, so you have to tandem lift left and right. Without a buddy, it's a pain in the ass, and it's also very sketchy because the car is pretty rigid. And you know, if you do work on cars for a living and you're used to that kind of shit, you might not have batted an eye at it. But I can't afford this thing to fall, so I was very careful. And now we got it to where we can start working on it. I might need to take it up a little bit more yet, but we'll address that when we get to it. There's a few different ways I can go about lifting it from this point. So now that it's set, we're going to start looking into rigging the engine lift up to the motor and make sure that it's nice and snug and it ain't going to go nowhere. Then we're going to start looking at taking some of these transmission mounts off and that one being the first, and start working our way around here and see if we can get some separation of the subframe. I noticed some of the radiator hardware stuff, it actually stays on the car side. A little clip of that, you can't see it too well, but you unbolt those 3 bolts there, and the support for the radiator and condenser stays on the car. So hopefully we won't have to do any additional rigging up. I might have to strap it up with something, but that's really no big deal. So now we're actually going to start turning wrenches, so stay tuned, and I'll be right back with the rest of the video. Thanks, guys. Alright guys, one more check-in before I actually get the subframe out from underneath this bastard. Just to kind of put it in perspective how I've gone about it, it's a mess. The cherry picker was a good idea and a bad idea. Good idea because you could adjust it, you could lift it up and move it around, versus the spreader bar across the top, right? It's fixed. Negative is there's no room underneath because of the legs. So I've got an army of jack stands under there. I've got all the subframe loose, down, still sitting on stands. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna wrestle it out. But one thing to pay attention to is the steering arm, the intermediate shaft. As you can see, mine was really rusty, so I was afraid to beat on it because it's a puny little thing. But took a chisel, put it right in the split there, and just beat the hell out of it until it opens up enough. And then I ended up taking a punch tool from underneath and tapping it off with a hammer. But so what I did was I got tension on the motor until I felt the bolts of that mount, the transmission side of that mount, have play. So I left them in. I left the actual rubber bushing tight. I moved to the back, same tension on the motor, trying to pull it out of the car, right? So I was fighting the subframe. So what I did was loosen up the back 3 transmission mount bolts. I loosened 2 of them until there was about a 1/2 inch of threads exposed, and then the 3rd one I slowly loosened to ensure that the engine and transmission were pulling away from the subframe and not still sitting on it. I wanted to make sure that the engine was essentially floating in the engine bay, and when I went to take these subframe bolts out, it was just that. There was no fighting the motor, there was no weight on the subframe, and that's exactly what I was looking for. So one thing I had to reach out to a guy about, you gotta hang your radiator condenser assembly up with zip ties, bungee cord, whatever, but it doesn't take much to hold it up there. And you'll leave the brackets that hold it on, sorry about the light there, the brackets that hold it on, you'll just leave them on the subframe itself, so it'll pull away. So what I've done is I've taken a single jack stand and put it on the front, and I also started the bolts, just a couple of threads to keep any movement this way, and I slowly let the back down. I've still got jack stands under it, but I'm about to take it out the rest of the way, at least get it down on top of the cherry picker frame down there. So I also have a jack stand directly at the center underneath where it bolts up to the motor, the transmission and motor bolt up, just as an extra precaution. I've never done this kind of job before, so I've got it sitting right there on the case. I haven't checked it in a while. Last time it's still got some weight on it. So my plan here is to get the subframe the rest of the way lowered down onto the legs of the cherry picker. Once I do that, I will then loosen up this transmission mount, and I'll also loosen up the engine mount and put a little more tension yet on the motor and take the motor away from the jack stand down there. Once I've done that, I can remove the jack stand out of the way, and I'll slide this whole assembly out towards me. And then after that, I will probably put that jack stand back under there for good keeping. Well, once we've reached that point, it's time to start looking at transmission removal and separation. So up to this point, aside from the only reason why I've taken so long with it is because I've been very, very careful. I can't afford to screw any of this up. And I'm also here by myself, so you don't want to have something that weighs 1,000 pounds fall on you and your phone's up on your bench or what have you. I'm not going to have anybody come check on me for some hours yet. So it's better to take your time in that kind of scenario. There's no rush here. Just need to get it apart. So one thing that is nice though is the steering unit is one unit. There's no extra connections other than the intermediate shaft, which in my case, I'm going to be replacing that shaft, as well as the sway bar bushings, sway bar end links. We'll have a feel at the tie rods. I did the lower control arms 6 or 8 months ago, so they're still good. But I got the 5th gear set coming on the way. Thank God for the guy that reached out to me on Facebook. So we're getting pretty good along here. This is about the end of the fight. We'll be able to start doing the repair. With all that being said, I'm still torn on whether or not to pull the whole motor and put it on a stand and be able to put take the flywheel off it and do the timing chain and yada yada yada. One thing I was told about by another guy that has done this shit before is it's, at least for the turbo coupe, that it's easier to remove through the bottom, right? So similar to like a Cadillac North Star deal. A lot of people don't have the means to take an engine out through the bottom of their car in their 2-car garage. So I've witnessed, it wasn't successful, but I've witnessed a guy pulled a North Star 32 valve out of a Cadillac Seville or a DeVille, whichever it was, and he pulled it out of the top. But in that specific case, which is relevant, that case you have to cut the whole the main harness to the computer. And long story short, it was ugly. But anyway, once we get a little further into this, move some of this other stuff out of the way, I'm going to make my decision after that. Because once you go that far, then we're taking coolant lines off, and I got to get a evacuation pump to catch all the refrigerant, and so on and so forth. And another thing is this car, I believe, had some form of aftermarket exhaust on it before I bought it, and the guy had the original hacked back on there. So I had a catalytic converter plug up on me, and the car would rack up about 20 pounds of boost and fall right on its face if you just barely put your toe on the gas pedal, and I couldn't figure it out for a while. Ended up being the cat was plugged up, so what I did was just cut it out and put a new piece of pipe in there. But the problem is the flange connecting to the header, the motor side, there's a gasket in there, and I'll have to replace it if I take it apart. But at the time I didn't, and I put a bunch of exhaust goop on it and tightened the piss out of it with my impact. So yeah, I'm not sure what I'll do. Because once I go that far, then, well, I've got the motor out, it's time to go ahead and get the exhaust manifold out. And if there's any broken bolts, I can go ahead and get them out a little easier on the table. Or if I need to drill them out, I can, that's more feasible. Obviously, I would never try that in here. However, I have broken bolts off of my exhaust headers on the Tahoe. They're aluminum heads with... I don't know what kind of bolts they were, the China crap that comes with the headers, but I did have to drill those bolts out, and of course, naturally, it was the one closest to the firewall. So I've done that shit before. It's not fun. So we'll see in the future whether or not that's going to happen. I'll just have to see for myself once I get this transmission out of here that how much more work it's really going to be to get the engine out, because that's a bit extra work, and it also opens up another can of worms financially. I'm not going to be able to put the engine back in with something that I find is wrong with it. So anyway, that's it for now. I'll add a little bit more to this here in a minute when I get the rest of the subframe out. Alright guys, it's my last little section for the day. I'm probably going to wrap it up after this. So as stated, I have taken way too long and was way too cautious about this, but I still owe a lot of money on this car. So if you feel like making fun of it for how many steps or extra jack stands or this or that or whatever, go ahead. I don't care. I got it apart without it falling. So anyway, that's what she looks like. It's pretty good design. Comes off one piece. Take your steering with it. The only thing I'm not positive on still yet is getting that jack stand out of there, but I didn't really want to disturb anything too much as it was sitting still, so that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like when you first drop her down. So The weight wasn't too bad. I can tell that this thing's been apart though. Pretty sure that don't come factory. Little hash marks on the bolts and stuff. I didn't do that. I even found some hash marks. That wasn't this side. Oh yeah, little hash marks for the radiator supports. So that's worrisome to me. I didn't realize this car had been that far apart. But so far so good. I just gotta figure out how I'm gonna drag this bastard out from underneath here, and we're gonna start taking the transmission apart, but that will be next time. So I can't really think of anything else to cover. I think I've got it all in the videos so far up to this point. So feel free to subscribe, like, comment, share your problems, share your knowledge, whatever. I'll be putting this on Facebook and on my YouTube channel at DopeZ71. You can follow my Instagram at DopeZ71 as well. You'll see a lot of pictures of the truck and a few of these. But yeah, that's it for now. This is the 5th gear popping out issue and a paper thin clutch repair. So I don't know if we'll have any more time this weekend to mess with it, but here in the coming weeks I'll have all the parts ready to go, so hopefully next time it'll be one smooth straight shot, yank the transmission, replace the stuff, put it back together. So that's it for now, guys. Like I said, let me know what you think, and I'll be back at it here in a couple weeks as soon as I can. Thanks for watching. Take it easy, guys.